The front desk clerk glared at him with suspicion, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter like she was bracing for a fight. "Sir, this robe isn't for guests," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. Keanu Reeves didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply smiled, calm and composed, as if the tension in the room didn't even exist. A few guests nearby noticed the exchange and turned to watch. Some whispered to each other, eyes wide. Others pretended not to notice, unsure what was unfolding. The hotel lobby, usually buzzing with chatter and footsteps, felt suddenly frozen. I didn't take anything," Keanu said quietly, his voice steady, almost soothing. But the clerk's eyes narrowed. "We have cameras. You were seen walking out with the robe. That's theft." A murmur ran through the lobby. A bellhop paused mid-step, unsure whether to intervene. A family at a nearby table froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. No one spoke. The tension was electric. Keanu simply nodded, as if acknowledging her accusation. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He simply remained calm, a quiet presence that seemed to draw the air around him into stillness. What she didn't know, what no one in that lobby could have guessed, was that the man she was accusing owned the hotel. Yes, Keanu Reeves. Not a guest. Not a stranger. But the majority owner of the very hotel she worked at. The irony hung in the air like thick smoke, invisible but undeniable. And what happened next would change everything in that lobby. Staff who had been bold enough to laugh at him moments before suddenly froze. Guests who had been curious onlookers now watched in disbelief. Every eye in the room followed Keanu as he stood still, a calm figure in the eye of a storm he hadn't even caused. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to demand respect. He simply existed in that space, quiet, patient, unshakable. And that silence, more than any words, carried a weight no one was prepared for. Because sometimes, the person you accuse the loudest is the one quietly holding all the power. It was a busy Saturday afternoon at the Grand Horizon Hotel, the kind of day when the lobby felt like a bustling city street. Guests rushed in with suitcases and shopping bags. Bellhops dashed from elevators with trays of luggage, and the soft hum of conversation mixed with the distant clatter of plates from the hotel cafe. Manager Barnes, standing behind the front desk, thrived in this chaos, or at least he thought he did. He strutted from one end of the desk to the other, checking staff uniforms, correcting clerks mid-sentence, and gesturing wildly at security cameras as if mere gestures could bend reality to his will. A shiny gold watch flashed on his wrist every few seconds as he moved, a visible badge of the power he so desperately wanted everyone to notice. To Barnes, authority was a performance. Power meant being seen and, more importantly, feared. If anyone dared question him, the glare of his eyes, or the sharpness of his voice, would remind them of their place. Most of the staff complied out of habit, some out of fear, and few out of quiet resignation. Then the door opened. The crowd didn't notice at first. No fanfare, no entourage, no camera crews. Just a man walking in with a quiet confidence that seemed to demand attention without asking for it. Keanu Reeves. He wasn't dressed like a movie star. No tailored suit, no designer shoes, no flashing rings. Just sunglasses, a simple jacket, jeans, and a calm presence that cut through the chatter of the lobby, like a knife through fog. There was nothing aggressive in his demeanor, no attempt to dominate. Yet somehow, the air seemed to shift when he entered. The energy of the room pulled in, subtly but unmistakably, toward him. He approached the front desk with an unhurried pace, his hands at his sides. Guests instinctively made space. Staff straightened without a word, and even Barnes, who had been in the middle of a self-important tirade, paused mid-sentence. "I'm here to check in," Keanu said simply, his voice soft but firm. Barnes narrowed his eyes, trying to reconcile the casual presence of this man with the need to assert control. "And you are?" he asked, the edge in his voice betraying his suspicion. Keanu smiled, not smugly, not arrogantly, but with a quiet, knowing calm. "Just a guest," he replied. Barnes' smirk returned, the kind that said he was ready to test the man, to remind him of his place. "We have a strict policy here," Barnes said, pointing at the small sign on the desk. Only registered guests are allowed in this area. Let me see your ID. Keanu handed over his card without hesitation. The clerk behind the desk immediately recognized the name and froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. A few staff members exchanged uneasy glances, but Barnes, engrossed in the surface-level details, didn't notice. He was ready to enforce rules with the confidence of a king, blind to the reality of the situation. The contrast was stark. A man who wielded authority for appearances versus a man who commanded attention simply by being. One relied on ego and intimidation. The other relied on presence and quiet strength. And at that moment, as the lobby held its breath, everyone, Barnes included, had no idea that the very man he was about to challenge wasn't just any guest. He owned the hotel. A whisper ran through the crowd. "Is that?" Keanu's calm eyes scanned the lobby. He didn't need to announce who he was. He didn't need to demand respect. He just needed to exist in the room, and that alone made everyone notice. Barnes leaned closer across the front desk, a spark of authority in his eyes that masked an undercurrent of panic he didn't want anyone to notice. He unfolded the small sheet of paper in front of him. A note from housekeeping claiming a luxury hotel robe had gone missing. "This says you took a robe from the lobby lounge," he said, his voice sharp. "Explain yourself." Keanu Reeves didn't flinch. He remained calm, his hands folded lightly in front of him. "I didn't take it," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying an authority that wasn't loud but impossible to ignore. A ripple passed through the staff. A young bellhop stopped mid-step, staring with wide eyes. A concierge froze in the corner, unsure whether to intervene or keep silent. Guests paused mid-conversation, eyes darting between the two men at the desk. The lobby, once a river of noise and motion, had become a frozen stage, the tension palpable enough to feel. Barnes' pride flared. No one dared to question him, and he wasn't about to let a supposed guest walk all over his authority. "We have security cameras," he said, pointing to the bank of screens mounted high on the wall. "You were seen taking it. That's theft. If you don't hand it over immediately, I'm calling security." Keanu's calm smile didn't waver. "Sometimes," he said softly, "accusations tell more about the accuser than the accused." Barnes' smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but his ego pushed it back into place. "Nice try, sir," he said, "but I don't respond to smart remarks. Only to facts. Facts that say you're breaking the rules. Now give me that robe, or security will handle you." The clerk behind the desk tried to look helpful, but her hand shook slightly. Other staff members shifted uncomfortably, aware that whatever was about to happen wasn't going to follow the usual script. The air in the lobby had changed. It felt heavier, charged, as if everyone present instinctively knew this confrontation was about to escalate, but no one knew how far it would go. Keanu didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He only shook his head slightly, his calmness now a quiet force in the storm of Barnes' bluster. "Arrogance makes people blind," he said softly, "right when they need vision most." Barnes' face reddened. "Vision," he snapped. "This is theft. You don't get to teach me anything." In that moment, the power dynamics of the room were clear. Barnes relied on fear, rules, and the illusion of control. Keanu relied on presence, calm, and the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to assert himself because respect followed him naturally. Barnes' pride pushed him further. He grabbed the robe from the counter and held it high, shaking it like a weapon. "I won't be fooled," he barked. "You're going to be escorted out. Security." The bellhop hesitated, unsure whether to move toward Keanu. Other staff exchanged frantic glances. Guests began filming with their phones, the energy in the lobby building toward a breaking point. Keanu Reeves finally took a step forward, his gaze calm but piercing. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Not with me, with yourself. Respect isn't about authority. It's about how you treat others." Barnes froze, the bravado faltering as if the words themselves carried weight heavier than any threat of security. He opened his mouth to respond, but the room had already shifted. The staff, the guests, even Barnes' own voice felt small in the presence of someone who commanded attention without demanding it. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice. The silence he left behind spoke louder than any yell, louder than any accusation. It was the calm before the revelation, the moment before the world tilted and everyone realized the truth. The man they were about to humiliate had all the power, and not in the way they expected. The lobby fell silent. Not just quiet, the kind of silence that makes every small sound echo. The ticking of the wall clock sounded deafening. The distant hum of the elevators felt like thunder. Phones slipped from the hands of some guests, and a few muttered under their breath, realizing something extraordinary was unfolding. Keanu Reeves stood there calmly, the rope still in Barnes' trembling hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't gesture. He simply existed, an unshakable presence that made the hotel staff and guests suddenly aware of the absurdity of the accusation. Barnes, meanwhile, was frozen mid-action. His smirk, so carefully cultivated over years of wielding authority, had evaporated. His face flickered between disbelief, fear, and rage. His eyes darted nervously around the lobby, searching for reinforcement, some validation from the staff that would restore his sense of control. But the staff were frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The young bellhop, who had moments ago been ready to intervene, stared wide-eyed at Keanu. He had seen celebrities before, but none had this aura, this quiet power that made the whole room seem to shrink around them. The bellhop swallowed hard, as if trying to force the words, "I need help," past a lump in his throat. An elderly concierge, who had worked in the hotel for decades, slowly raised a hand to his mouth. His eyes were wide, staring, as if trying to reconcile the man in front of him with the quiet whispers that had circulated in the staff rooms for years. "I recognize him," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Barnes' panic grew. He waved the robe as if brandishing it would restore order. "Security. Someone call security." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the crack in his carefully maintained armor. A few guests instinctively reached for their phones. Some were recording, some were whispering, and a couple of children peeked out from behind their parents' legs, sensing tension, but not understanding why it felt different. Keanu's gaze didn't shift. He simply looked at the room, calm, measured, and entirely in control despite the chaos around him. Every glance he gave seemed to draw the eyes of those present, holding them hostage with quiet authority. He took a single step forward, slow and deliberate, and the air seemed to tighten. "It's remarkable," he said softly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "How quickly people assume the worst of others when they rely solely on appearances." A clerk behind the desk shivered. Her hands had been hovering over the keyboard, ready to call security at Barnes' command. Now she hesitated, realizing she had been about to act against someone she had no idea was far beyond the scope of their assumptions. The whispers in the lobby grew louder, but more like murmurs of awe than gossip. Guests craned their necks. The bellhop shuffled nervously, but couldn't look away. Barnes' voice, once the loudest in the room, now sounded small, almost fragile. Then came a shift, a subtle but undeniable change. Phones were raised. Everyone wanted to capture what was happening. Not for drama, not for entertainment, but because the air in that lobby had changed. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Something larger, something almost surreal, was happening. Keanu Reeves took another step, this one closer to the elevators, and the silence deepened. Even the staff who had been the most defiant moments ago were now frozen, unsure of what to do. The words accusation and theft seemed to lose their weight in the face of his presence. And then the front doors opened. A gust of cold air swept through the lobby, rustling papers and shifting a few loose items. The sudden movement startled everyone, but it also drew attention outside. A sleek black limousine had pulled up, its engine purring softly. 3 senior executives hurried inside, breathless. Their eyes locked on Keanu, and the tension in the room spiked to an almost unbearable level. Guests leaned forward. Staff froze completely. Barnes' face had turned pale. The authoritative mask he had worn so confidently moments ago was shattered. One of the executives, slightly out of breath, addressed Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, we've been trying to reach you all morning." The room went completely still. The gravity of the situation finally hit everyone. This wasn't just any guest. This wasn't even a simple misunderstanding. The man everyone had been about to humiliate owned the hotel. Barnes' hands fell to his sides. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Wait, Reeves," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking louder might make it untrue. Keanu didn't smile, didn't scold, didn't gloat. He simply turned, his calm gaze sweeping across the room, and the quiet authority he had carried from the moment he entered settled fully over the lobby. Everyone now understood, without a word from him, that the power dynamics had shifted entirely. The black limousine's doors opened with a soft click, and the three executives moved quickly into the lobby, their polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. Their presence alone added an undeniable weight to the room, official, urgent, and impossible to ignore. "Mr. Reeves," the tallest of the executives gasped, slightly out of breath. "We've been trying to reach you all morning. There's an urgent matter we need to discuss." Keanu Reeves turned slowly, his calm eyes scanning the room, resting briefly on each guest and staff member. The tension that had gripped the lobby for minutes now felt almost electric, every person present acutely aware that they were standing on the edge of a revelation. Barnes, the hotel manager, finally found his voice, but it was weak, trembling. "Wait, Reeves, you're the owner?" His words came out in fragments, disbelief thick in his throat. "Yes," the executive said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "He's the majority owner of the Grand Horizon Hotel." A hush fell over the lobby. Guests stared, phones raised, capturing the moment. Staff froze wide-eyed, some whispering to each other in disbelief. Barnes' face went pale, his earlier confidence evaporating completely. The authoritative mask he had worn so tightly now lay shattered at his feet. Keanu took a slow step forward, the kind of deliberate movement that held everyone's attention without any effort. "I came here," he said calmly, "simply to check in, to experience this hotel as any guest would." His voice carried across the lobby, soft but undeniable. "But now, it appears I'll be making some decisions that affect the people who serve and run it." The room seemed to shrink around him. Every staff member, every guest, felt the shift. Authority, once wielded like a weapon by Barnes, had been stripped away. Not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through presence, calm, and undeniable truth. Barnes' shoulders slumped, the weight of his arrogance crashing down upon him. I didn't know who you were," he stammered. I assumed." Keanu's gaze met his, quiet and unwavering. "That's the problem," he said softly, yet with a sharpness that cut through the room. "You assumed. You judged without knowing. Respect, authority, leadership, they're not something you can fake or demand. They're something you earn." The executive stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on Keanu's shoulder, as if to emphasize the shift in control. "We've been trying to reach you all morning regarding the management review. Some of the staff have shown exemplary conduct, and others need guidance." Keanu's eyes scanned the room, landing finally on the elderly concierge, the one who had treated him with respect from the very beginning, who had never questioned or mocked him. A small, approving nod followed. "You've earned this," he said. "From today, you'll be the branch manager, or, in this case, the floor manager." Barnes' face twisted with frustration and humiliation. He opened his mouth to protest, but the room had already shifted. No one listened to him anymore. The staff who had feared him now looked to Keanu, and even the guests seemed to understand. The real authority had revealed itself, quietly, without drama. The executives exchanged a glance. "We'll handle the rest," one of them said softly. "No need for conflict. The matter is resolved." Keanu turned toward the elevator, his movements calm and unhurried. "Remember this," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the now silent lobby. "Power is not about the one who shouts the loudest. It is about the one who commands respect, quietly, through integrity, patience, and presence." Phones were still raised, but no one dared interrupt. The lesson had been made clear. Authority without humility was empty. Ego without awareness was dangerous. And those who treated others with respect, regardless of status, were the ones who truly held influence. Barnes sank into the nearest chair, head in hands, a stark contrast to Keanu's composed retreat. The staff looked at each other, some still in shock, others nodding quietly, absorbing the lesson of the day. Keanu reached the elevators, pressed the button, and turned once more to the room. "I came to be a guest," he said quietly. "But now, I leave knowing that some things in this hotel, like respect, humility, and understanding, are far more important than any robe or rule." With that, the elevator doors closed. The lobby exhaled collectively. Phones lowered. Guests resumed their activities, but something had changed, something permanent, something undeniable. The quiet, calm authority of one man had shifted the balance of power in a room filled with arrogance, judgment, and assumptions. And everyone who had witnessed it knew they would never forget the lesson. Barnes sank fully into the nearest chair, head in his hands, the color drained from his face. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, not because anyone had shouted at him, but because he had been confronted with something far greater than authority, truth and humility. Keanu Reeves, calm and unhurried, walked slowly toward the old concierge, the only staff member who had treated him with dignity from the moment he entered the hotel. Every step he took seemed to ripple through the lobby, pulling the attention of staff and guests alike. The shift in energy was palpable. It was no longer about accusations, rules, or appearances. It was about respect, and those who truly understood it. "You've treated people with dignity," Keanu said quietly, addressing the concierge. "You didn't judge. You didn't assume. You acted with patience, humility, and professionalism. From today, you're the floor manager." The elderly man's eyes widened in disbelief. His hands trembled slightly, but a smile slowly spread across his face. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't need to say anything," Keanu replied. "Just continue doing what you've always done. Treat people with respect. That's more powerful than any title, any rule, any authority you can hold." Staff members who had been tense moments ago began to breathe easier. Some exchanged quiet glances, nodding to each other as the reality sank in. The lesson was unmistakable. Respect earns more loyalty and trust than fear ever could. Barnes, still slumped in the chair, finally lifted his head. He looked at Keanu with a mixture of shame and awe. I didn't know who you were," he stammered. "I treated you unfairly." Keanu's gaze was steady, calm, and unwavering. "That's the problem," he said simply. "You assumed. You judged without knowing. True leadership isn't about being feared or being seen. It's about integrity, humility, and understanding. And it's never too late to correct your mistakes." A few staff members nodded silently, absorbing the gravity of his words. The bellhop, who had been standing frozen moments before, finally exhaled, realizing that the lesson extended far beyond the robe, far beyond rules, far beyond titles. It was a lesson about human behavior, ego, and the quiet strength that comes from self-awareness. Keanu turned to Barnes one last time. "You've got a choice," he said softly. "You can continue letting ego guide you, or you can learn humility and lead properly. The choice is yours." Barnes swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he felt truly accountable, not to corporate policy, not to appearances, not to staff, but to something far larger than himself. The weight of that realization pressed down on him, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be powerless in the face of someone who embodied true authority. Keanu Reeves didn't linger. He walked toward the elevators, slow, measured, composed. His presence left a lasting impression on everyone in the room. Guests lowered their phones, still stunned, while staff whispered to one another, exchanging glances that said, "We'll never forget this day." As the elevator doors closed, the room exhaled collectively. A silence followed, different from before, heavier, reflective. This was a silence of understanding, of respect, of realization. The lesson had been delivered, not with anger or theatrics, but with calm authority and quiet dignity. Even Barnes, once the embodiment of arrogance, understood the shift. No yelling, no dramatic confrontation, no humiliation from others, just the presence of someone who commanded respect through calm, integrity, and wisdom. And in that moment, The hotel lobby became more than a place of rules and transactions. It became a space of lessons learned, humility embraced, and respect earned. Keanu Reeves had entered as a guest, accused falsely, and now left having changed the dynamic of the entire hotel. Not with anger, not with power, but with the quiet certainty that true influence always speaks louder than noise. The lesson was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Respect isn't given because someone is powerful. It's given because someone deserves it. The lobby had finally begun to settle. Guests whispered among themselves, phones lowered, cameras off, as if realizing that some moments were bigger than a clip or a photo. The staff, still stunned, exchanged quiet glances. Each pair of eyes reflected the same thought. What just happened wasn't just about a robe, a rule, or even a hotel. It was about human nature, ego, and respect. Keanu Reeves had entered that lobby as a simple guest, or at least, that was what everyone believed. He had been accused falsely, confronted unfairly, and challenged by the arrogance of a man who thought authority came from being seen and feared. Yet, Keanu never raised his voice. He never shouted. He never demanded acknowledgement. And that was the power of presence. In the minutes that followed, everyone began to reflect on the chain of events. The staff who had whispered and giggled before suddenly recognized their own behavior in Barnes' arrogance. They realized how easy it is to judge without knowing, to assume without evidence, and to wield authority without wisdom. It wasn't just a story about Keanu. It was a mirror for their own actions and decisions. The elderly concierge, now the newly appointed floor manager, slowly walked through the lobby, adjusting staff and offering quiet guidance. There was no rush. There was no drama. But there was calm authority in every step, a reflection of what Keanu had exemplified. He had shown them that true leadership didn't shout. True leadership didn't flaunt power. True leadership simply existed, quietly, and made others rise to meet it. Barnes sat in his chair, head in his hands, thinking. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his assumptions. All the power he had clung to, all the authority he had wielded with intimidation, suddenly seemed hollow. He had confused control with respect, fear with admiration, ego with leadership. And the lesson he had just received was undeniable. Status and authority mean nothing without integrity and humility. Keanu's exit was as calm and composed as his entrance. He moved through the lobby, nodding slightly to the staff, who had shown him respect. Guests parted for him instinctively. But there was no need for awe, no need for recognition. His presence alone had taught the lesson. He pressed the elevator button, paused for a moment, and looked back over the lobby. "You came here as a guest," he said quietly, his voice carrying to those still present. "You judged me, assumed the worst, and tried to enforce authority without understanding. That is the mistake most people make every day. They confuse titles, rules, and appearances for real power. True power, real influence, doesn't announce itself. It waits, it observes, and it teaches those willing to learn." The elevator doors closed softly, and the lobby exhaled collectively. Silence filled the room, but it was no longer the tension-filled silence of fear. This was a reflective silence, one of understanding, one of quiet awe. The staff realized that the moments they had just witnessed would stay with them forever. The lesson of humility, integrity, and respect had been delivered, not with shouting, not with punishment, but with presence and calm authority. For the guests, it was a story they would tell for years, not because it involved a celebrity, but because it involved a fundamental truth about human behavior. The people you judge, underestimate, or dismiss today may be the ones shaping your world tomorrow. The impact of your actions, your assumptions, and your treatment of others ripples far beyond the immediate moment. Barnes finally rose from his chair. He walked slowly through the lobby, not to assert power, but to apologize quietly to the staff and guests who had been part of the confrontation. There was no grand gesture, no speech, no fanfare, just recognition of his mistake, the first real display of humility he had shown. The staff, inspired by what they had witnessed, began to operate differently. The young bellhop straightened with newfound confidence. The clerk spoke to guests with renewed patience. The employees understood that respect was earned not through fear or titles, but through behavior, empathy, and presence. And in the midst of all this, one truth stood out clearly. Keanu Reeves hadn't come to punish anyone. He hadn't come to humiliate. He hadn't come to assert dominance. He came to teach, quietly, calmly, and powerfully, that respect is not for the powerful. It is for everyone. Because the person you ignore today, the one you underestimate, or the one you treat with arrogance, may very well be the person deciding your future tomorrow. It was a simple lesson, yet profound. The people in the lobby understood it, the guests captured it, and those who witnessed it would remember it forever. Humility, patience, integrity, and quiet authority. The combination of these traits, Keanu had shown, was stronger than any title or rule. Speech balloon, and now it's your turn. Type respect if you believe humility is real strength. Share where you're watching from and reflect on this story, because true influence isn't loud, flashy, or immediate. It's quiet, it's patient, and it changes lives in ways we often don't expect. The story of that day, the accusation, the silence, the revelation, and the lesson would become more than just a tale about a hotel. It would become a reminder of what real leadership and respect look like, leaving a lasting imprint on everyone who saw it. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It observes. And when the moment is right, it teaches.